We were having a conversation outside over pizza, and I was talking about actually these two photographs that I've got up on my screen here, about Windows 7 and how, although you can come up with lots and lots of really well-measured, calculated metrics for an operating system, at the end of the day, probably the thing that's going to change people over to Windows 7 is they just like it. And those two photos were taken with two different digital SLR cameras. And the one on the left was taken with a camera I owned, or still do own actually, but it was taken about 4 or 5 years ago. The one on the right was taken with a camera I bought last week. It cost me quite a large sum of money. And having watched people arguing on the forums about was it actually worth it because of the change in image quality, you can see there was nothing wrong with image quality a few years ago. It's not just image quality that drives the upgrade, it's the pleasure of using something. And I just want to kind of plant that thought, because although I'm going to talk about some of those serious measurable things, a lot of the thing that will drive it is the pleasure of using it. It also gives me a chance to start with a really good pun, okay? Because you know where this is going. People have worked it out already from the fact of the close-ups there. It really is the bee's knees. Right, so that's the entry from Bad Puns Are Us. As Gavin's already said, my name's James O'Neill. I work as an IT pro evangelist out of the Reading office, so this is a place I pop into quite frequently. I blog relatively extensively. It's been a bit quiet the last few days, but I put something on my blog most days, and that's the address of my blog. I always get a bit fed up when I listen to other people blogging their blogs too much, so I won't overdo mine. But lots of bits and pieces on there. And if you can't find the slides from anywhere else, there is a little link to my slide decks on the side of my blog. Now, just while I talk about downloading the slides, when I was saying, I can actually step up and fill this vacant session, I did think to myself, I need to just use a slide deck I've used previously, because I'm not going to have time to write something specifically. And this slide deck has had two totally diametrically opposed reviews on the last two occasions I used it. The first time I used it, I had a whole bunch of people say, can I get the slides? Can I get the slides? And then, yes, it'll be up on my SkyDrive. And then the next one, we actually had written feedback, and several people said the slides were too much marketing fluff. So I can only make conclusions about the first audience. I'll apologise for the slides up front. They are slightly marketing fluff, but they do give me a useful framework to work from. So just general trends in the world that Windows 7 is fitting into. And somebody came up with these 5 C's. One of them is consumerization. If I look around Microsoft, I see people running netbooks that Microsoft never purchased. Okay. If you look around a lot of companies in the last few years, you'll see MSN Messenger being used internally and for communication both to colleagues and to people outside the company, and that was something the IT department never deployed. You see the same thing with phones. There is a story that's been quite widely circulated, and I do believe that it's true, but there is a risk it is an urban legend, but my sources tell me it is absolutely true. Steve Ballmer, Microsoft CEO, went to talk to some quite senior people at NASA, and Windows Mobile formed part of the conversation. And one wag from NASA said to Ballmer, well, if Windows Mobile is so good, how come every time we see somebody from Microsoft, they're touting an iPhone? Ballmer got kind of slightly tetchy about this and went back to the office, and he sent something down to Microsoft IT, say, find out for me how many people sign into Exchange using the ActiveSync client that identifies itself as being the iPhone ActiveSync client. Just give me a number. And a number came back. Anyone want to guess how many iPhones were being used inside Microsoft? This is just in the US, incidentally.
Quantity or percentage?
Quantity. I couldn't work it out as a percentage. 8,000. And Ballmer, not surprised, well, he might have thrown a chair or something, you know. He was not a happy bunny about this. But if you think about the demographic for iPhones, who buys iPhones? It's people with a reasonably large disposable income who like gadgets. And that's a pretty good fit for Microsoft. In the US, we don't actually issue people with mobile phones. So, you know, I get a Windows mobile device. I like having a slide-out keyboard, so there's no point in me getting an iPhone. We get issued with phones. In the US, they get told, buy your own phone and expense your phone bill back to the company. So they get a free choice. And that's another example of consumerization. So we've got lots of those. I recognise a few faces, so I guess some of you have been along to some of the virtualization talks I've done. And I always say in those talks, when I joined Microsoft back in 2000, I worked in MCS, I met lots of customers. No customer ever mentioned the green agenda and carbon footprint to me. Now, it's not every conversation, but it comes up on a pretty regular basis. So that's an important area, and we need to think about consolidation to reduce the number of machines that we use, how we can use IT intelligently to cut down on travel. Okay, and again, it's a number I quote quite regularly, but for one round trip journey to and from the office, generates the same amount of carbon emissions as running my PC 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a month. Okay, so very easy to actually save more carbon by using IT intelligently to cut out travel, he says, having travelled into London, than just to worry about number of watts that a PC uses. But well, no, we didn't all drive, but you know what I mean. If I was really cutting out travel, I'd be doing this by video conference or something. But that's an important point. And again, actually, the rise of netbooks, again, is about using low-power devices where those devices are appropriate. A lot of the stuff we do with virtualization is around reducing power of devices on the desktop. And we really kicked this off with Vista. In XP, we never had group policy that would enforce power-saving settings across a wide number of desktops, and now we've actually got that with got that in Vista, and it carries on into Windows 7. Contingency. Until quite recently, I always viewed the contingency part as being the lasting effect on the IT industry of September the 11th. That what happens if people can't come into the office? And of course now, we actually had a mail today, a couple of people who work not very far away from me and Microsoft have had swine flu. And we had a mail from one of our directors saying, if you think you might even have a remote chance of having swine flu, don't come anywhere near me, please. That wasn't quite what he said. He actually said, you know, the important thing is your health and your family's health and getting well and so on. What he meant was, don't give it to me, you swine. Careful choice of swine there. But a number of situations where we actually say, as well as remote working being green, what happens if we have to say to people, there is a major alert on, London is closed. There is a tube strike. Don't try and fight your way into London. There is some other eventuality where we actually say, we want you not to work from the office. So that's part of it. Compliance is well, if that's the lasting effect of September the 11th, compliance really is the knock-on effect of Enron. And I almost want to ignore costs, because I've made this joke a number of times as well. I have never in my 20-something years in this industry, 21 years, 22 years at the end of the year, I have never yet met someone who said, the biggest problem we've got is spending all that money. Right? Cost pressure is just a constant. It's a given. You know, the economy might be in a pretty ropey shape now. If it picks up at the end of the year, next year, the year after, you think you're going to be rolling in money and struggling to say the words, struggling to spend it all? Of course you're not. So cost is just a constant. It's a given. And where we're trying to push to support an awful lot of these things in one way or another is actually around providing the best possible client to support all of those bits. Okay, so part of the client is about better connectivity. Part of the client is actually about better management and control that leads to lower costs and better compliance. On the client side, and working in conjunction with the server, we address the green side of things. And with the deployment technologies we have, a number of people inside Microsoft have gone and bought their own netbook, turn up at the office, plug the netbook into the corporate network, press function key 12 and say, I want to boot off the network. Install the corporate image onto my laptop or my new netbook. Now that's audited, so it's legal as far as licensing is concerned, and it's now managed as part of the domain. So although I own the physical asset, the management of that now belongs to the IT department, and the IT department doesn't have to spend its time and effort just keeping track of different people's purchasing requests and buying laptops for different individuals' needs. There's a lovely quote that one of my colleagues came up with. He was actually talking about this particular model of Dell. Now, I happen rather to like this Dell that I've got here, but he didn't. And he basically said, the person that chose this thing obviously didn't have to carry it. He'd like something smaller. So you can actually go out and source your own, or you can delegate the budget down. Now, if you do that, there are certain things that start to come into play here, like how do we support a wide diversity of applications? How do we actually keep track of those assets? How do we actually deploy stuff out? And this is where this desktop optimization pack comes in. Now, it's targeted at software assurance customers, which means the very smallest customers are excluded, but you can get software assurance with as few as 5 machines. So there's no reason why anybody in all but the smallest business should be excluded from that. And if I remember how this slide builds up correctly, those are all the pieces that actually make up the desktop optimization pack. 2 different kinds of virtualization. One providing a whole virtual operating system. So if you've got an app that just cannot be persuaded to run on 64-bit Windows 7, for example, I've got a very nice little demo up on TechNet Edge of an application that will only run on a 32-bit OS, and it's running in a virtual machine on Windows 7 64-bit. Funnily enough, it's another photography application, and it controls the camera through the USB port. And this uses the new version of Virtual PC that allows you to map USB ports through to the virtualized OS. So I've got my camera attached by a USB cable and an application running in the virtual machine that actually controls the camera and allows me to do tethered shooting. So we've got that. We've got application virtualization for 2 apps that will run on the OS but will interfere with each other to keep them separate. And then some diagnostics tools and inventory management tools. The one that really sticks out there is actually the advanced group policy management. That's the one piece of MDOP that's not really about managing the desktop. It's about making sure you don't do stupid things with group policy and not realize you've done them. So good kind of marketing thing. Yes, immediate return, because actually you do see the benefit very quickly. And the cost of ownership side, we talk about a typical desktop cost saving of about 70 or 80 US dollars. The telling thing, though, in all of this is this graph. And there you go, a completely meaningless looking graph for a minute. But what that shows you, if you just concentrate on the yellow bit and the blue bit, customers who bought software assurance but didn't buy MDOP, 27% of them were very satisfied, and about 60% were just ordinarily satisfied. And the ones who bought MDOP, those numbers swap round. So they're a lot happier with what they've got and with Microsoft in general as a result of having spent a little bit of extra money to get MDOP. So that really, for me, says, yeah, forget what Microsoft actually tell you about the product. What do the customers tell you? And the customers say, we bought this and we feel much better. There you go. That's conclusive. I can bang on for hours about its technical superiority. Do we feel better about the product because we've got this extra? Yes, we do. That's either Bob the Builder or Barack Obama, I'm not sure which. So I keep wanting to shift this arrow around. Those of you who've been on Twitter over the weekend will know that rumours have gone into absolute overdrive about imminent RTM of Windows 7. Supposedly the build that is going to be the release one was built late on Friday night. How that leaked over the weekend, if it's true, is slightly beyond me, but assuming that is the release one, it will sit around for several days before we actually release it. One way or another, though, we said we're going to release it probably in the second half of July, so sometime in the next couple of weeks. Have you noticed a different vibe coming from Microsoft in the run-up to the release of 7 compared with the run-up to the release of Vista? Anybody notice any difference in Microsoft? Anybody care? Have I sent you all to sleep? I'm not asking for specific differences. You can just nod. But working inside the company, I do notice a different vibe. There is a lot less kind of rah, rah, rah about the new operating system that we had with Vista. Somebody, when I threw this question out at a session down in Bristol last week, somebody said, "You're behaving a little more modestly." And I thought, yeah, actually modesty is about the right kind of word there. They're letting the product do the talking, and 7 is getting a fantastic press. Some of that, I think, is based on unrealistic perceptions of Vista. I think Vista gets an unfairly bad press, and if you believe Vista is significantly worse than it actually is, and then you have a look at 7 looks artificially good, right? It's not to say 7's a dog, but you know, if you think Vista's a dog, then 7 looks correspondingly better. But the process has basically been what we've got up there. Basically, don't just chuck features at it, is what the first bullet point is saying. Think about the business scenarios. Don't just allow developers who say, hey, I've got a really good idea for a feature here, can we stick it in the product? No. Anybody read Fake Steve Jobs on Google's new OS for netbooks, by the way? Go and find the Fake Steve Jobs blog and read what he had to say about that, because that actually says about not every idea that comes out of developers is a good idea. Concentrate on the scenario. So what are the things that we are trying to make better? Things like connections into branch offices, users out on the road, general information worker productivity, manageability, supportability. Those things are all common themes. Now, if you look at Vista, we put the photo gallery into Vista, and the photo gallery is a lovely app, but it doesn't need to be in the core OS. So that's been spun off to the Live team. If you want it, you download it from Live. Same with Movie Maker. Same with, yeah, we're going to get into Internet Explorer here, but that will get me onto political grounds. But major thing that's different, if the EU had actually told us you need to take Internet Explorer out of XP, we couldn't have done it. We probably could, given some notice, have taken it out of Vista, but as Vista shipped, we couldn't take it out. We designed 7 so that IE was actually removable. Now, that then had this slightly strange effect that when we realised we'd made it removable, we realised we were going to get walloped by the EU if we actually shipped it in the box in the EU. So, you know, there's somebody somewhere going, oops, that wasn't quite the great idea we thought it was at the time, but we'll kind of pass on and move on from that. But actually get back to, I don't want to say back to basics because that's a kind of tainted phrase, but take some of the unnecessary stuff out. Also, we said we're going to give customers a time plan. When we shipped Vista, we said it has been too long since we shipped an operating system. XP has been out too long, it's become entrenched, and it is going to be hard to persuade people to move off XP because it's been out there and it's given them stability that we just haven't had on an OS for a very, very long time. You know, no previous version of Windows lasted as long as the current release as XP did. And that obviously has a knock-on effect. So we said when we released Windows Vista, we will ship a new one in about 3 years' time. Now we've done slightly better than that, in that we RTM'd Vista in November 2006. The big launch festivities came in January. Well, the big launch festivities are going to come for Windows 7 we've actually said October the 22nd is going to be general availability day. Release to manufacturing, as I've already said, will be sometime in July. And between July and October, the OEMs can figure out which browser and everything else they're going to put on your system to slow it down, bog it down, and give you a lousy experience. Sorry, how they're going to optimize their package for the benefit of their customers. I am somewhat skeptical, incidentally, about machines that come with lots of stuff from the OEM. I think many versions of Vista can be improved simply by taking a new Vista SP1 CD and reformatting and reinstalling the software and not taking what the original supplier put on the machine. But that's another story entirely. The other thing that's unusual with for the Windows team is this time in the product cycle with Vista, we were telling people, oh yeah, that feature is going to go in the next release. Okay? Try and get an expert from the product team to tell you about the next release of Windows. They just aren't talking about it. Okay? Part of the problem, and I found myself justifying this to one of my colleagues internally, and I'm not normally the person that takes this role, because normally it's, oh, the product group should tell the field, and the field can judge what they can and can't tell customers. This guy was asking for a roadmap on Hyper-V, the server technology. And I said, the problem is when you start telling people what your plans are, people start building what they believe your plans to be into their plans. And if you're not careful, you've committed your customer to something you were thinking about doing before you'd actually said, this is absolutely what we're going to do. So now, partly because the Windows group is under new management, it's being run by Stephen Sinofsky, who used to run the Office team, we're not going to say way in advance, this is what's going to be in the next version. And when did a forecast 3 years in advance ever get it right on anything that was worth knowing about? You know, trends, yes. Specific features, no. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep our counsel until we're ready to say this is how we expect to deliver it with a pretty solid degree of certainty. So what we tell you, you can actually believe in. We're going to tell you less, but you can believe in it. That's how that's gone on. And that's part of why I was asking about, do you notice this under new management thing with the Windows product team? Because certainly inside the company, there's a very, very different vibe around the Windows team compared with when Brian Valentine was doing those sorts of things. You can look Brian Valentine up online. He left Microsoft just about the time that Vista shipped to go and take up a very senior job at Amazon. And Brian was well known for doing things like riding onto stage at company events on a Harley, actually putting a Harley up as a prize for people. One particular event, he's Canadian, but he looks like a rugby player. He must have played a lot of ice hockey. He actually turned up in a pink tutu on a Harley and had his photo taken with members of staff to raise, and basically you got your photo taken with Brian and you gave some money to his pet charity. And there was a long queue of people to do that. Stephen Sinofsky wouldn't do any of those things, right? Much more the quiet, academic, studious type. I will stay in my room, I will produce something really great, I'll show it to you when I'm ready, and it'll blow your socks off. That's Sinofsky's way. And it's annoying for me internally because I get less information out of the product group. But when I see the reaction that Seven's getting from customers, I'm going to live with that, because we're producing a better product as a result. If there's one really significant learning, I was going to say screw up, but I'm on camera, and of course it's been captured now. But if there's one thing that we took away from Vista, we got a lot of flack with Vista because things like device drivers weren't ready when the product rolled out the door. Now, because this is a less of a breaking release than Vista was, the Vista device drivers should all just work on 7 anyway. But we've done much more work to make sure we don't get that same situation. So just as a very simple example, when I the predecessor to this laptop that I had when Vista shipped also had an NVIDIA graphics card. This one's got an NVIDIA graphics card in it. And when I put the RTM of Windows Vista on, Vista had this great feature that the graphics card driver could crash and Vista would actually recover from it. And boy, did I see a lot of that feature. Because the NVIDIA driver, on the day we built the RTM release of Vista, stank to high heaven. Now, 3 weeks after the launch, NVIDIA released a new driver. It went onto Windows Update. It quietly went down to all the machines out there. All the problems went away. Now, 2 or 3 weeks ago now, there was a press release out from NVIDIA saying they have signed off their final Windows 7 driver before we RTM'd. Okay? Now, this is a first. Okay? The major device driver manufacturers have said, yes, we've got an update to support all your features, and we're ready ahead of time. So that's a big learning. And just while I'm on this breaking thing, if you think about the move to Vista, lots of changes came along with Vista. Security, driver model, we changed how some of the networking worked, we changed the deployment technology. Service Pack 1, well actually most of the stuff in Service Pack 1 had trickled out before we released it as a service pack. It all came down from Windows Update. And I keep teasing people about service packs, that one day we will stop doing service packs. You know, wait for the first service pack will cease to be an option because there won't be one. Of course, if you know Server 2008, Server 2008 actually shipped at Service Pack 1. And this, I then started making the joke that this was going to be our new strategy. All products would wait for all products would ship at Service Pack 1, so customers could follow Gartner's stock advice, wait for Service Pack 1, and say, aha, but it's already Service Pack 1. So, Service Pack 1, expect Service Pack 1 for Windows 7 not to be out within the first year. For Vista, it was a year, and actually that was really to sync it up with the release of Server 2008. They haven't given a date for the Service Pack 1 for Windows 7, but let me set an expectation here. It will be longer than the Service Pack 1 for Vista was. And now we're getting, well, it's a bigger change than the Service Pack, but if it runs on Vista, the expectation is it will run on 7. There will be exceptions, okay? But basically, if it works with Vista, it works with 7. And I got into huge trouble with a marketing person for actually just doing this in a presentation on one occasion. Going, now, what version is Windows 7 exactly? Apparently, it reports it's Windows 6.1. The reason for this, and again, you heard it here first if it comes to pass, Windows 8 might actually ship as 6.2. Changing the major version number upsets a huge number of applications. Right? By not changing the version number that the software reports, and just changing the branding, we can actually avoid breaking quite a lot of applications. So why not do that? So we may, I don't know what we will do when we get to Windows 16, because then we'll be up to 6.9. But you can see how the trend will go, that we may just keep on incrementing the minor version number rather than the major version number. And there's lots of little things like that. Also, we've done a lot more with the application compatibility toolkit in Vista. When we ship the next service pack for Windows Vista, you'll see a bunch of applications that don't work on Vista today, that do actually work on 7, will start working on Vista. And that's because we've done some work on the ACT that will get backported onto Vista. These themes are basically the overall themes for the features that went in that I was talking about a couple of slides back. So what are we actually trying to do? Well, these things are pretty much givens as themes. They're not big radical changes. Security has stopped being seen as Microsoft's huge, overwhelming weakness, but it's still an issue. We want to keep working on security, keep working on control. And if there was one feature that really got a lot of flack in Vista, it was the number of consent prompts from user account control. Okay. Well, we've actually reduced that and made that a lot more sensible. And just to give you an example, if I go into Device Manager, now in Vista, this would actually require a consent prompt. It would, if it was going to do anything. There we go. What happens with Device Manager now is it's signed, and what it is able to say to the operating system is, yes, I do require certain privileges, but I am trustworthy. Okay. Now, if I go and run the registry editor obviously comes from Microsoft as well. But if you run regedit with a bunch of command line parameters, you can do untold damage. So if I go and run regedit, surprise, surprise, it still needs a consent prompt, which upsets the projector a bit, but I can say, no, don't run that one. So we've just cut down the number of prompts. And there were some silly ones in Explorer where something would say, OK, you're going to need, do you want to delete this? Yes. Now you're going to need to provide administrative credentials. OK. Now, I'm going to ask you for your, and it's like, don't give me 17 different dialog boxes. So we've just streamlined that and so on. Lots of stuff around improving diagnostics, virtualization, not least in providing XP mode for everybody, which I guess people will have heard of, and also the Windows Easy Migration. When I did my upgrade from the beta to the release candidate of 7, I used the Easy Migration tool. And around the office, people have a variety of ways of doing the migration. The most popular one is you plug in a big external drive and you just X-copy stuff off and X-copy it back on again. But I thought, no, this time I'm going to actually check out the experience on the Windows 7 Easy Migration tool. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So I wrote a blog post about it. I'll plug my blog now. Came in the office a few days later, and my boss's boss said to me, oh, I did the upgrade from beta to release candidate as well. Yeah. And I read your blog and I thought, well, if James uses it, it's obviously not a sign of weakness to use the Easy Migration tool. And it was brilliant. And he's now going around evangelizing the Easy Migration tool to everybody. So that just works really well, even down to little things like, let's see if this is still on, Easy Migration. The log has disappeared. Okay, there is a log that I wonder if I can get at it from here. Don't make your demos up on the hoof. No, it's obviously cleaned it off, but there is. Oh, sorry. Did I? Oh yes, Easy Transfer Reports. Thank you. So it will actually tell me what was on my old computer and what's gone onto the new computer. So you can see it, migrated accounts and settings and various other things. If I go into Program Reports, it'll tell me that actually I haven't installed one or two bits and pieces that I had on my old machine. So it says, well, you know, that one's already installed. And each time it loads up, it does a check to see what is installed and what isn't. So it will tell me the things that are missing, so I can actually go through there and go, ah, right, I haven't actually put Songsmith on. Well, I've still got the install files for Songsmith. I can go and put that on. So we can go and see if we're helping a user to do a migration, we can go and see if they've got all the apps they're supposed to have, and anything that was dead and lying around on their PC from previously, we can choose to leave off, but we can actually put things on as required. So those are all kind of things that are important to the enterprise. And then going back to some of these initial themes, we've changed some stuff around remote access. One of my colleagues, some of you may know a guy called Andrew Fryer who works as part of the same team as me and draws cartoons. And he was trying to draw this cartoon for direct access, where direct access was the first-class boarding gate to get onto the corporate network. And this was kind of Club Euro, not Club Europe, whatever they call it, Euro, what's a British Airways called? Cattle class Euro Traveller, is it? world traveller. But this is basically, today, if you want to get into the corporate network, you've either got very specific gateways that you have to go through, or you have to go through the process of explicitly creating a VPN. Direct access is a whole new idea, based around tunneling with IP version 6, because most of the stuff in between is going to be IP version 4. If you connect to certain ranges of addresses or certain classes of name, direct access says, hang on a minute, that's something on the corporate network. I need to go through a specific gateway to get to that, and the gateway then takes you through to that server. You're not fully connected to the network, so you can't go out and browse around the network, but when you go and you actually say, I want to go to a particular address, if you go to a machine individually, then you go through that gateway. If you go and say, on the other hand, I just want to go to the BBC News website, then your machine says, well, actually, I know you're at home and connected to the internet. I don't need to bother the office for that one. Now, this has some really useful things, because when the machine boots up, of course, it says, I want to talk to a domain. So it goes and finds a domain when it boots up. And when the machine says, it's time to poll for group policy, it finds the group policy from the domain, because it knows the name of the server it's actually got to go to, so it knows that that has to be routed in. So now you're very much a first-class citizen. There's none of this, someone's just sent me a link to something and it's on a SharePoint server on the corporate network, so I've got to get my smart card out and I've got to start the VPN connection, and when I got the VPN connection up, all my web traffic goes through a proxy on the corporate network, and it's all just too much grief. So I won't bother, I'll wait till I get in the office. Well, now you just click on the link and it says, right, I need to route that through the gateway, and done that for you. And it's a little bit slower making the initial connection, but you really wouldn't know. So a different aspect of network optimization, we have a lot of people talking about machines out in branches, and we're getting more and more variety of solutions for serving branches, and I'll talk about one of the other ones in a sec. But today, if you've got a branch office, quite often the bandwidth for the wide area network is a constraint on people's productivity. Basically, somebody goes to download a large file and it comes down from a server on the corporate network, and then somebody else goes to download the same file and it comes down from the server on the corporate network, and another person does it, and that network basically is the bottleneck. You can use file replication technology to push stuff down to the branch, but then you've got more than one copy of it, and you have to deal with the question of, well, which copies are going to be read-only, which copies are going to be writable, and so on. The idea of branch cache is basically we've got two different modes of operation. One of them is a wholly peer-to-peer mode. The other one uses a designated server, and the first person to pull the file down actually goes to the server and says, right, I support branch caching. And the server says, that's very nice for you. There is a hash that identifies this file, and if the file's over a certain size, actually there are these hashes which identify segments of the file, and you can go off and talk to your the cache on your network and see if anybody's got that. So the machine goes off and goes, nobody has actually got that, and goes back to the server and pretends it doesn't support branch cache and says, I'm just an ordinary client, can I have the file please? Pulls the file down and then either offers it to anybody else who asks, or if you're working with the server, offers it to the server and says, would you like to put this in your cache for me? So now, once the thing's been downloaded once, we don't have to actually go and get it from the corporate headquarters. So better use of the network connection, better productivity for users, and it's all just built into the client and Windows 2008 R2 server. Those you need currently to have the latest server to get the hash generation piece that you need to make all this work. Big leap forward in Vista, just hopping down a couple more little topics here. Big change in Vista was the fact that we wove search into everything. But we've taken it a stage further with Windows 7, that we have a concept of federated search. Now, if you've used SharePoint, and especially if you've used the separate search server product. Have I got an Explorer window open? No, I haven't. Okay. If you've used the separate search server product, you'll have come across something called federated search. And federated search is reasonably easy to understand because we actually see it. Let's take a classic example. I go somewhere and it doesn't support it. So let's just go to Wikipedia. And what you notice when I go to Wikipedia, I hope, why are you not doing this? Ah, there we are, it's caught up. That little arrow's turned orange because the current search page actually has discoverable search on it. And all it is a little XML file that says, here's how you search Wikipedia and get back an HTML page. Well, you can also, in the same open search XML description, describe how to get the thing back not as formatted HTML, but as an RSS feed or some other kind of XML. So if I go to this little one that I've got set up for searching Twitter, let's do that one. That will actually do a search against Twitter. It's obviously going to go a bit slowly because I'm doing a live demo. And Twitter, as you probably know, can send stuff back in RSS format. What's happened here is it's just processed that data and it knows how to render it. So it's actually rendered that, and you can see we've got hit highlighting, but we've actually got information. XH558, incidentally, is the single Vulcan bomber that's still flying, and an aircraft that I've chased all over the British countryside in the last few weeks trying to photograph it. But we can see we've got search here that we can just add other search sources either into Explorer, or we can actually put them in so that they show up on the start menu here. Now, on this particular machine, live search has been kind of forced on there by Microsoft IT, and they won't actually let me add my own custom search providers on. But from a corporate perspective, you can push out other search sources, so now the user can actually do a search against multiple sources and make it as easy to find stuff on the corporate intranet as they can on their local PC. And it's all based around this protocol called OpenSearch. Writing the little XML files is dead easy, and I've blogged it, but if you just search for anything on OpenSearch, you'll find that. Now, I always give government departments a bit of flack on this particular one. In Vista, we introduced this technology called BitLocker, full volume encryption. Absolutely brilliant if you employ people who are prone to leaving their laptops on trains. Senior civil servants, government ministers, you know the type of people. When we first released Vista, if you wanted to encrypt more than one volume, you had to go to the command line to set it up, which was a bit of a pain. Wasn't technically supported, although it was perfectly doable. Changed that in Service Pack 1, you can encrypt any local drive. So civil servants and senior government ministers, being the clever chaps they are, they decided there was a much easier way to lose data, and that was to put it on a USB stick. The best one of the lot was the one where the Home Office had the details of every criminal in the country on a USB stick. Must have been a large USB stick, but, you know. And somebody lost this thing, and they were worried that it might fall into the wrong hands. Like criminals. I mean, the criminals would know who each other were then, you know. Well, for 7, we've introduced a new technology. The marketing people got their hands on the name. They've called it BitLocker to Go. As you can see, we've even trademarked it. And the idea is that with group policy, you can actually say, if you want to write stuff to a USB key, it must be protected with BitLocker. Easy. Okay? So in Vista, you can say, thou shalt never write to a USB key. But that just makes people less productive, and they find ways around it. You know, they copy the stuff down to a DVD or something. So now you can say, you can use a USB key, but you can only write to it if you protect it with BitLocker to Go first. The writing ability is specific to Windows 7. But if you plug a protected stick into Vista or into XP, it will start up a little thing that says, if you know the password associated with this device, I can give you a little bit of software that will give you read-only access to what's on here, but you can't write back to the disk. So you can share stuff and you can protect it. Sooner or later, people will start getting a soft 2B pencil and writing the password onto the USB stick. Okay, we can't mandate any kind of varnish or write-proof surface on there. Educate your users not to do that, but it's another piece of technology that just makes life a bit easier. Since BitLocker was a good name, we thought we'd use the locker bit somewhere else. And I remember it might even have been Windows 2000. I think it was XP, but certainly in the early days of XP or the late days of Windows 2000 Professional, I set up a demo for my boss to demonstrate software restriction policies. I couldn't remember what they were called for a second. And the problem with software restriction policies is they're either absurdly easy to break. You can run an executable provided it's called winword.exe. Oh, right, okay, I will rename this illegal bit of software to winword.exe and now it runs. Alternatively, I take a hash of the file, and now you can only run this file if it has a particular hash associated with it, and as soon as WinWord gets patched, I have to completely recreate the whole of my software restriction policies. It was a good idea, but it didn't work. The idea of AppLocker is we can not only identify the applications, but we can also identify setup programs which will allow users to kick off, because the installation is done by the Trusted Installer Service, and we can say if the application is signed and we recognize the signing certificate and these other metadata fields say particular things in, so you can't change the metadata fields without breaking the signature, then either permit or forbid this application. So now what we can say is if the product family is Microsoft Office and it's been signed with this certificate and the version number is greater than X, allow the user to install it. Okay? If it's signed by Adobe and it says it's Acrobat and it's a version greater than 8 and a bit, I forget what version it has to be, I think we're up to 9 now, but I don't actually run Adobe Reader, I use Foxit's Reader instead, I greatly prefer it. But if it's greater than that, then allow the user to install it. Don't have to come to IT. However, if it says it's free cell and it's signed by Microsoft, absolutely forbidden. Don't give them any chance of running that one. So really easy rules to do this. It doesn't say it on the slide, but there's also a PowerShell module for AppLocker so that you can write a simple script that goes and looks through a bunch of directories that you specify and creates all the necessary rules to recognize the different pieces. Some stuff on manageability. I've just mentioned PowerShell, which is in there somewhere. Yes, it's top of that list on the other side there. Very good article I read recently about why every machine on your network should have PowerShell remoting enabled, because we can actually run remote commands to configure things, but we've got a much stronger scripting environment, and we can script group policy, etc. The same for remote access to reliability data. Just as we got remote access to some of the troubleshooting tools and some of the tools to fix problems, we've also got access to reliability data remotely. And there's this nice new tool called the Problem Steps Recorder. Now, those of you who are testing 7, have you actually, anybody filed any bug reports and used the Problem Steps Recorder? No, or one person almost putting his hand up and then going no. Problem Steps Recorder is great because you start it running and basically it waits for you to click the mouse. And every time you click the mouse, it takes a screenshot and it records on that screenshot the coordinates of where the mouse was clicked, and actually in the text that it stores, it also says what the name of the control was and various other bits of diagnostic information. Is that a question, or are you stretching?
No, it's a question. Do you know if they're going to actually put it in like accessories or anything to make it a bit easier for the user to find, apart from just putting PSI.exe and running?
I don't. there would be no reason why when you're building your own custom image to deploy, you couldn't create an icon to do it. But I suspect for the moment it might stay buried. If it's given that it's not been made very prominent in the release candidate, it's probably not going to change for RTM.
Yeah, that goes against almost the grain of what it says. It's easier for the user to report from. Yeah, it's not easy to find.
Yeah, you have to start typing problem steps recorder, don't you? And I wouldn't like, although it says I've found it in control panel, I wouldn't like to have to give a user the path to find it in control panel either. My inclination, I have to say, would be to put a shortcut on the menu for users. But the great thing with that is when you're trying to explain to the poor support person at the other end of the phone, I did this, 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 and this. The support person doesn't always get a clear picture of what's going on. I get this, I have one particular customer I have to support quite a lot, my father. And he will phone me up and he will either give me everything that's on the screen except for the one critical piece of information that I need, or he'll say that nothing has happened. Well, why are you phoning me up, Dad? There must be some problem. Yes, but I can't describe what it is. Okay. He's going to get Windows 7 fairly early on in its life, I hope. And problem steps recorder means he can just go click, 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 bang, an error appeared. Here's the error, and I can see what he did. Okay, that's, to me, that's a big time saver. But also, the file that it creates is a multi-part HTML file, an MHT file. So you can actually use it for gathering information for writing documentation if you choose. Because all it's doing is it's capturing screens and where you clicked. So just go and edit the text between the pictures, and instead of saying, clicked on this control in this window, blah, 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 just change it to, go here and do this, go here and do that, type this in this box, and then click this button, and you've got a ready-made documentation tool. And my mind's gone a complete blank on the last one. We've made group policy better. I can't remember what the details of that one are. One technology I'm very sceptical about is, again, if you've been to virtualization sessions I've run, I'm sceptical about VDI because in a lot of situations, somebody who doesn't need a PC on their desktop actually only needs to run one or two applications and therefore would be well served with terminal services. Somebody who isn't well served with terminal services probably needs a whole PC on their desktop. And the idea with VDI is you give them a whole operating system that runs remotely, but you don't give them a PC on which to run it. And there are niche circumstances where actually that's a really good thing, but for me VDI is wildly oversold. What we've done for 7 is we've made it a better client for VDI. And that kind of goes against the grain because the idea is around getting rid of the rich desktop and just putting a thin client there. But also, we've made it better for connecting to terminal services. So now we've got two-way data, two-way multimedia for things like using unified communications software. And we introduced multi-monitor support in remote desktop for the first time with Vista, but all the monitors had to be the same size and there were restrictions on how you could lay them out. With the client that we've got for Windows 7, basically anything that you can run your local machine in, you can use for a remote desktop as well. I'm not clear on how they've improved printing because there was a major change for printing in Windows Vista. And a couple of people told me it was absolutely life-changing, but I haven't yet investigated what the difference is for 7. One nice little trick on virtual hard disks, incidentally, is you can configure the boot configuration database on a Windows 7 machine or a Server 2008 R2 machine so that it will boot from a virtual hard disk. In other words, it mounts the VHD file that you would normally use in a virtualization environment, and it treats it just like a local disk with a file system on it and so on. Now, you can update the boot configuration database on older operating systems, but if you try and put an older operating system inside the VHD, it will start to boot, and then it will find it's booting from a VHD, which is something that it just can't comprehend, and it will blue screen about halfway through the boot process. So the only operating system that can go in there is 7 or Server R2 and things that come after, but you can actually put that on a Vista machine or a Server 2008, not R2 machine. And that's actually how I do my multi-boot between the two different versions of Server. Lots of deployment enhancements. I'm not going to go through each of them because really that is a whole evening's work by itself. But we have much better management of images than we had before. So there is a new tool called DISM, which stands for Deployment Image Servicing and Management. DISM will let you apply images, so it's a bit like the old ImageX tool from the admin kit, but it will allow you to add components and remove components from an image and also from the running operating system. Lots of stuff around improvements in the centrally managed user state migration tool and Windows deployment services. One of the major changes that's come in with that is if you're deploying to multiple machines, we now do multicast so that you can actually have multiple machines installing without clogging the network up too much. That's really just restating some of the stuff that if you take the core OS and then you see what these bits of MDOP were adding, well, those are really what they're adding in the major areas. But that, oh yes, that's kind of summarising the same thing, but not in a graph this time. This is just summarising as a list. I don't want to talk about dynamic IT. One thing I do want to talk about just at the end is you'll be aware that one or two corporate customers haven't deployed Vista yet. And it does kind of throw up a question for us of what do people do if they haven't deployed Vista. If people have already deployed Vista, the upgrade to 7 is so easy. It's just very straightforward because all the pieces of work you have to do about verifying, have I got support from this piece of hardware, will this application run, all of that you've done already, and it's really just a cursory run through. So that piece is easy. And if you're an organisation that's well down the path of doing a Vista migration, there are kind of 2 points. One is you don't want to throw that work away and start again from a clean sheet. The other is, at this stage of the life of Vista, if you're just about to deploy Vista now, then you're probably not going to be the first to deploy 7 either. And so if you stop the project to deploy Vista, you're probably not going to get 7 in any earlier as a result of doing it. So for people who are actually down the track of deploying Vista, well, great, carry on doing that. If you're on XP and you've said, no, we're going to skip Vista, and I've heard of 1 or 2 customers doing that, there is a risk involved because some applications may go out of support in the meantime, but basically it's going to be something that's quite commonly done. You'll see a lot of best practice information come out of it, and the major thing is what worked on Vista will work on 7. Okay, so if you're going straight from XP to 7 and you've missed the Vista generation, what broke on Vista will also break on 7 as likely as not, so you have to go through a significant piece of compatibility. If you're still on Windows 2000 or anything older than that, I don't even want to talk to you. But seriously, these are, if you're on anything before XP still, you are probably having to manage the issue of having out-of-support operating system and possibly out-of-support apps as well. And that's never a good place to be. The sooner you get out of that situation, the better. And to be honest, if you're an IT professional working in that kind of company, get out. Don't even stop to pack. But I'll get in terrible trouble for saying that kind of thing. But if you're on something older than XP, seriously, you've probably worked out how to manage your way around these problems, and it's not just Luddism. There must be some reason that's holding you back. for XP users, the major thing is going to be the people who are going straight up from XP to 7 and missing Vista. And as I say, there'll be a lot of stuff about that. Some useful links there. I'm not going to dwell on those. I'm just going to stop there and say thanks very much. We have got a little time for some questions, but we will get shoot out. So I'm going to just say thank you very much and hand back to Gavin.